Well, Stephen Holder is going to write a piece that'll be out later today on Justin Houston, and he's joining us this morning. Fine writer from the Athletic. But yeah, anything else in the last 10 days we need to fill Joe in on, do you think, Stephen?
I mean, does he know who won, like, the last election? I mean, like, how far back do we need to go here? I mean, like, are you sure? Are you with us?
I just pulled him aside and said, Joe, after the show, you and I can talk a little bit, okay?
Yeah, tequila does help you forget a bunch of stuff, Stephen.
I did have a conversation once in an airport with a guy. I don't know how the hell this is true, but I had a run-in with a guy, not a run-in, an encounter with a soldier who was coming back from overseas once. And we were crossing paths in the airport, started talking. He's like, "Hey, do you know who won the Super Bowl?" I was like, "Really? Like, that was like a month ago, dude." Like,
man,
you don't have like internet over there? I thought they were up to date on it.
So if anybody's been in the coma for the last 12 years, and the first question they ask is who won the Super Bowl, isn't the answer almost always the New England Patriots?
Right, exactly. So the question should be, did the Patriots win the Super Bowl?
And on a good year, the answer is no, they did not.
Right.
Hey, you spent some time with Justin Houston, and then you've been working on a story as far as a pass rusher that's coming to the Colts, and what can he provide? What did you learn, Stephen?
Well, here's what I did. We often hear these names thrown around in free agency, and we declare winners and losers and all that good stuff, right? And it makes for good copy and it makes for good radio, but oftentimes what happens is we don't really go the extra step and figure out, okay, well, what are we really talking about here? So what I did this week was I spent a lot of time just watching film of Justin Houston from last season. Now, look, I'm not an expert on Justin Houston because, who is, right? So I figured I need to learn something about this guy, and I will tell you, I got an eyeful. What I learned, I think the biggest takeaway for me in watching Justin Houston from 2018 was that he's a very well-rounded player. And that, for me, I think was the big education that I came away with. I think we look at him for his sack numbers oftentimes, but, here's a guy who, against the run, this guy has tremendous toughness on the edge, and I think that's going to help the Colts as well. Look, they made great strides as a run defense last season, and I think they're going to be able to continue that trend by adding a player like Justin Houston from what I saw. Just great toughness and an ability to hold up there and to really kind of set the edge at times. So you don't necessarily make the tackle, but you're funneling things back to the middle, right? So now Danico Autry and company hopefully make that play, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of that from him as well. I mean, he's got an opportunity to put up sack numbers, but it's the game obviously is much more than just pass rushing. So that was the big takeaway for me. The other thing I would say is that as a pass rusher, he is not one-dimensional. He's a guy who does still have some burst, and he can beat you with that, but man, is he strong and can bull rush you, and that is extremely effective as well. So I think you're going to see a really well-rounded player in Justin Houston.
All right, Steven, go back to that first part because that's interesting to me that I would have I look at the signing as you're bringing in a guy that's maybe started on the downside of a career but still has a lot left in the tank, but you're going to manage some of that. And you're going to manage it by throwing him in on third downs. If he's that good, as an all-round player and everything, is he your starting defensive end?
Well, I wonder that too. I think, that will obviously work itself out, but I wonder, because I do think it makes sense to manage his snaps. Look, he did miss 4 games last season, and so that tends to start happening when you get older, as you know. So I think it would be smart for the Colts to limit those snaps. There's no question about that. Now, but what I'd say is I think you'll see him play more than just third downs. And what the Chiefs did with him oftentimes was take him off the field for an entire series and give him a blow. And that's kind of how they did it. I don't know whether the Colts will do it that way. There's different ways you can go about it. You can do it from series to series, or you can do it from, possession to possession, an entire drive. There's different ways you can go about it. The Colts, from my experience and just what we saw last year with Matt Eberflus, I think what we saw generally was them shuttle guys in and out. So lots of on and off the field and constant rotation with that defensive line. So, I think we could see some of that. But it's an interesting question. You make a great point. Look, you don't lose anything with Justin Houston against the run. I'm just telling you, just based on what I saw, I don't think you lose anything with him in there. In fact, he's going to be as good as anything they've got against the run based on what I saw. So like I said, I just don't think he's a guy, because he's had big sack numbers, he's not a guy we associate with being, some sort of significant run defender. But look, you don't accumulate or put together the reputation that Justin Houston has by being a one-dimensional player, and that just wasn't the case from what I saw.
It's been awfully quiet on the Colts front while Joe was gone. So you didn't miss a whole lot there, Joe. They did pick up a safety from Cleveland.
Off the waivers, I saw that.
But other than that, for the most part, you think until the draft, the Colts are pretty much set right now?
Yeah, I think they're in draft mode, and that tends to happen. You'll see that around the league. I mean, the transactions are really going to sort of slow to a crawl here. And that's typical, right? I think at this point, the emphasis, I guess, would be on finalizing that draft board. The pro days are winding down for the most part. And so they're really getting into the home stretch here. And right now, I think you've come through the major part of free agency. And, for most teams, you kind of like where you're at. And the next step is figure out what you get in the draft, and then there's that second wave. We're going to see guys get released after the draft. It always happens, right? I mean, if you're Team X and you've got a surplus of defensive linemen and you draft 2 more, well, now someone's got to go, right? So you're going to see some of that after the draft. You'll see trades potentially through the draft. I mean, there's going to be movement. There always is. There's potentially some big dominoes to fall, like, Josh Rosen, for example. What happens there? Do they draft Kyler Murray in Arizona, right? So I think the Colts are like a lot of teams. They're sort of waiting in the weeds to see what happens, see what you get. Do you get the guys you want in the draft, and then reassess after that? The Colts, just because of Chris Ballard's nature, they're one of the teams that I think will, be probably more willing to act in those situations after the draft than a lot of other teams, just because Chris Ballard, he likes to sort of make his moves at those sort of other times, after the draft, after final cuts. I mean, those are big opportunities for Chris Ballard in his book. So I would look for the Colts to potentially be active after the draft.
All right, I got one for you. If I'm not mistaken, this Ryan Grant signing to Oakland, he's the only guy that's changed teams. And we still have a bunch of guys that are sitting there waiting. Are they waiting because they like this team so much they want to come back? They waiting for Chris to give them offers? Or did we just have a bunch of like glue guys that aren't that important to sign, immediately in free agency, and they're guys that might get picked up, once the draft does go through and teams didn't get the guys they thought they were going to get?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, I guess, the likes of like Dontrell Inman and even an Al Woods, who I don't think is coming back, but is certainly out there and played some good football for them. There's a lot of guys like that, I think, around the league, right? And the Colts have their share. I think it's generally because there's not a lot of demand for their services right now. The Colts know that, and so they know there's no urgency to act. So I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Get through the draft, see what you got, and then reassess. For example, Dontrell Inman, he's a guy I've had a lot of conversations about with people because people are very interested in him, and he did make some very big plays last year and kind of came out of nowhere. But what I also remind people, and I agree with that, by the way, like Dontrell Inman was a godsend at a time when this receiving group just couldn't get it together at all, okay? They made a great move there bringing him in. But 2 things have happened. Number one, other guys, I think, over the course of the season did start to pull it together, so that helped. And then, obviously, the Devin Funchess signing is a big deal there because there's a lot of overlap between them. You talk about 2 big guys, possession receiver qualities, characteristics, both kind of, I don't want to say they cancel each other out, but there is some overlap there. So then you've also got the draft. And I think we all agree that receiver is a potential target at some point, potentially even early in this draft. So I think the Colts are just kind of sitting back and waiting to see where this goes at wide receiver before they make a decision on Inman. And I think the same would apply to a guy like, for example, Al Woods. They've got a lot of options at defensive line, and I think they want to figure out whether they avail themselves of those options before you look at other options on the market.
Stephen, we look forward to seeing the article on Justin Houston a little bit later on today at The Athletic, and we will talk to you and see you real soon, buddy. Thanks for all your help.
All right, guys, just keep an eye on my Twitter. I'll put it out there. Appreciate it.
Sounds good.